That night, after tucking an exhausted and disappointed Sarah into bed, David sat in his home office, the soft glow of multiple monitors illuminating his determined face. As a senior cybersecurity analyst for a Fortune 500 company, he knew that digital footprints were like breadcrumbs. They always led somewhere interesting. His first discovery came through a simple LinkedIn search. Margaret Whitmore had conveniently omitted her previous roles from her HOA president biography. 3 different suburban communities in the past 5 years, each stint ending abruptly with carefully worded announcements about pursuing other opportunities. David's fingers flew across the keyboard, diving deeper into public records. "Bingo," he muttered, pulling up court records from a neighboring county. A pattern emerged: massive fines, arbitrary rule changes, and a curious connection to White Ski Landscaping Services, a company that somehow won every HOA maintenance contract wherever Margaret held power. The company's registration papers listed a familiar name: Bradley Whitmore, Margaret's husband. David's investigation took an unexpected turn when his doorbell camera app pinged at 5:47 a.m. The infrared footage showed Margaret, still in her designer workout gear, slipping into various backyards along Maple Drive. Her measuring tape flashed in the pre-dawn light as she documented alleged violations. David quickly logged into his newly installed network of motion-activated cameras, a security measure he'd implemented after the birthday party disaster. "Oh, you're getting sloppy, Margaret," he whispered, watching her methodically photograph his neighbor's properties without permission. Mr. Johnson's garden gnomes, Mrs. Patel's prayer flags, the Garcia family's basketball hoop. Nothing escaped her zealous documentation. But the smoking gun came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Rodriguez's grandson Miguel worked it for the community center where the emergency HOA election had been held. After hearing about the birthday party incident, he happened to mention that the security footage from that day was still available. The grainy video told a damning story. Margaret and 2 friends entering the building at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday when most homeowners were at work. A quick meeting, 3 raised hands, and suddenly Margaret was president. No quorum, no proper notice, no other candidates. David's printer hummed as he compiled his evidence. Financial records showing inflated landscaping contracts, documentation of illegal property entries, timestamps of Margaret's dawn raids, and bylaws clearly prohibiting her actions. His cybersecurity training had taught him the importance of redundancy. 1 copy went to his cloud drive, another to a secure USB, and a third to his lawyer. As he finished organizing the last of the files, a notification popped up on his screen. His motion sensors had caught Margaret entering the Thompsons' backyard again. But this time, she wasn't alone. A White Ski Landscaping truck was parked nearby, its logo partially visible in the security footage, and Margaret appeared to be marking spots for mandatory landscaping upgrades. The community center buzzed with tension as homeowners filed in for the emergency HOA meeting. David sat quietly in the front row, his laptop and presentation ready, while Sarah and Mrs. Rodriguez handed out copies of the HOA bylaws to arriving residents. The room fell silent as Margaret strutted in, flanked by 2 men in black security uniforms. "Before we begin this unauthorized meeting," Margaret announced, her voice dripping with manufactured authority, "I'd like to introduce our new HOA enforcement team from Elite Security Solutions. They'll be helping us achieve immediate compliance with our standards." The security guards moved to block the exits, their earpieces gleaming under the fluorescent lights. A wave of worried murmurs swept through the crowd until Mrs. Rodriguez slowly rose from her seat, her 4'11" frame commanding attention. "Miguel, my hero," she called out sweetly to one of the guards. "Did you tell your Jeffa who paid for your police academy training?" The guard's professional demeanor cracked as he recognized his grandmother. "And Carlos," she addressed the other guard, "how's your mama's arthritis? The tea I gave her helping?" The guards exchanged awkward glances, their allegiance visibly shifting. Margaret's face contorted as she realized her power play had backfired spectacularly. David seized the moment, stepping up to the podium, His presentation was methodical, devastating in its precision. Security footage showed Margaret's dawn raids into private properties. Financial records revealed the kickback scheme with White-Ski Landscaping. The fraudulent election video played in horrifying clarity on the projector screen. But perhaps most telling, David continued, pulling up a final slide, is this property value analysis. Our non-compliant native gardens and community improvements have increased home values by 15% more than the cookie-cutter loans Ms. Whitmore keeps pushing. 3 independent realtors confirmed this data. Margaret grabbed for the microphone, but her designer heel caught in a power cord. She stumbled forward, arms windmilling, and face planted directly into a potted native plant display Sarah had arranged for the meeting. Yellow pollen dusted her red pantsuit as she scrambled to her feet. This is, she sputtered, mascara smearing. A fully recorded meeting. David finished smoothly, pointing to his active laptop camera, including your attempt to intimidate residents with unauthorized security personnel. The vote was unanimous. Margaret was removed from the board, her fines were invalidated, and a new committee was established to promote sustainable landscaping practices. As she stormed out, leaving a trail of pollen in her wake, the community broke into applause. 1 month later, David's backyard hosted another gathering, this time a certified HOA event. Sarah proudly accepted the Young Conservationist Award from the State Environmental Society, her butterfly garden project, having inspired a neighborhood-wide wildlife corridor initiative. Mrs. Rodriguez's empanadas were again a hit, and the koi pond had become a mandatory stop on the local school's science field trips. And Margaret? She'd moved to a high-rise condo in the city, but her legacy lived on in an unexpected way. The HOA now required all new board members to sign an anti-harassment pledge, fondly known to residents as the No Karen Clause. I'm Margaret Whitmore, your new HOA president, she announced, her voice carrying the same warmth as a tax audit. Her manicured finger jabbed at a gold-plated name badge pinned precisely at chest level. And this, she paused dramatically, gesturing at the garden with a sweeping motion that seemed to physically pain her. This jungle of yours has exactly 18 violations. I've been documenting them all morning. David instinctively stepped between Margaret and the children, who had begun to huddle together near the pond. Sarah clutched her new microscope, a birthday gift from her science teacher, as if it might shield her from the unfolding disaster. Ms. Whitmore, David began calmly, his customer service voice kicking in from years of it work. You're trespassing on private property during a permitted children's event. I'll have to ask you to. Permitted? Margaret's perfectly penciled eyebrows shot up so high they threatened to escape her forehead. She pulled out an iPad Pro, its screen protected by a monogrammed leather case. According to HOA Bylaw 7.32, subsection C, all gatherings exceeding 12 persons require written board approval with a minimum 14-day notice period. Her red lacquered nail tapped the screen triumphantly. I see no such approval in our system. A small whimper escaped Sarah as her best friend Emma whispered something about having to leave. Parents began awkwardly gathering their children's belongings, the festive atmosphere evaporating like morning dew under a harsh sun. That's $500 for the unauthorized gathering, Margaret continued, her voice rising with each perceived violation. She began circling the pond like a shark that had caught the scent of blood. The non-regulation depth of this pond? $300. Those unapproved native plants? $200 each, and I count. She made a show of counting the flowering patches, 7 species. The solar lights without architectural committee approval? $400. The butterfly garden that attracts uncontrolled insects? $300. Mrs. Rodriguez stepped forward, her 4'11" frame somehow radiating more authority than Margaret's 5'8". Mira, Senbora. These children are trying to learn about nature. My Carlos never had. English only at HOA proceedings, Margaret snapped, not even bothering to look at Mrs. Rodriguez. She produced a stack of citations from her designer tote bag, each one printed on premium paper with an embossed HOA letterhead. That's $2,400 in total fines, Mr. Chen. Due within 7 business days. David felt his hands trembling, not from fear, but from a slow-building rage he hadn't experienced since his last corporate deadline meeting. His daughter's small fingers interlaced with his, and he squeezed them gently, drawing strength from her presence. "And one more thing," Margaret added, her smile as artificial as the Botox barely concealing her frown lines. "This party is over. Disperse immediately, or I'll be forced to call our HOA security service." The autumn breeze carried the sound of children's laughter through David Chen's backyard as he carefully arranged the last of the educational display cards beside his prized koi pond. His daughter Sarah's 7th birthday party wasn't just any celebration. It was a tribute to her growing passion for science and nature, something she'd inherited from her mother. 20 eager faces gathered around the pond's edge, their eyes wide with wonder as they watched the orange and white koi glide beneath the crystal-clear surface. David had spent weeks preparing for this moment, even installing underwater lights to help the children better observe the fish's behavior. The garden itself was a testament to years of dedication. Native wildflowers swayed gently in the wind, their late-season blooms providing a natural haven for butterflies and bees. It was exactly how his late wife, Maria, had envisioned it. And these fish, David explained to his captivated audience, holding up a laminated diagram, help maintain the pond's natural ecosystem, just like how every plant and creature in this garden has its special role. "This is completely unacceptable." The sharp voice sliced through the educational moment like a knife through butter. David turned to see a woman in a blazing red pantsuit standing at his garden gate, her perfectly manicured hand gripping an iPhone 15 Pro Max, as if it were a weapon of mass documentation. Somehow, she had managed to slip past both the private property signs and the decorative butterfly welcome flags that Sarah had helped design. The children's excited chatter died down to confused whispers as the woman marched across his meticulously maintained yard, her Christian Louboutin heels leaving small divots in the moisture-rich soil. With each step, her phone's camera clicked rapidly, capturing everything from the solar-powered fountain to the butterfly garden that Sarah had helped plant just last spring. "Daddy," Sarah whispered, tugging at his sleeve, "who is that lady? Why is she taking pictures of our party?" Before David could answer, the woman's heel caught in one of the garden's drainage grates. Instead of showing embarrassment, she turned her stumble into an opportunity, crouching down to photograph what she immediately labeled a hazardous ground condition in her notes app. Parents who had been chatting by the refreshment table fell silent, watching the scene unfold. Mrs. Rodriguez, their elderly neighbor who had brought her famous empanadas for the party, crossed herself quietly and muttered something about El Diablo en Prada, the devil in Prada. The woman's perfume, an overwhelming cloud of what had to be the entire Channel No. 5 inventory, preceded her as she approached the pond gathering. Her eyes, sharp behind designer glasses, scanned the crowd of children as if she were counting potential violations.